I was looking in my shed for an old radio I could have another go at repairing, see if I can put together a video on it. And I came across this old Dansette 222 radio, which I've had for a number of years. I think I acquired it sometime in the mid-90s. As you can see from the front, it's a bit tatty, it's missing the dial. And when we look inside it, we can actually see it's fairly clean, but it's got lots of the Hunt capacitors, which are fairly well known for cracking and failing. There's some Plessey electrolytics, which are almost certainly out of spec. And down in one corner by the final audio output transformer, a snail has actually made its home. So on the bench this afternoon, we got this Dansette 222 transistor radio from about 1961. It had been working probably about 15 years ago when I used to use it as a shed radio, but it's been sat at the back of the shed ever since then. It's survived at least 2 shed moves, and just wonder if it can be resurrected. It's missing the front dial, which I know used to be on there, so it's probably snapped off and is long since lost. The case itself is fiberglass, which I think is quite rare. Don't know many fiberglass case radios. You can see there's some of the fiberglass fibres are visible, and then it's just the paper covered. This is the back of the radio, which I took off. It's just covered in a sort of paper or almost like sticky back plastic type material. So the radio needs a very good clean. I've already evicted a couple of spiders from it. There's a bit of a ding in the front panel. I'll fix that, get rid of some of the cobwebs. I think that's some sort of wood louse or something, desiccated wood louse. As I say, already taken the back off. So when we turn it over, we have a dead snail on the audio output transformer. It all looks fairly clean inside, but when we look down at these capacitors, these Hunt capacitors are cracked, so they're going to need to be replaced, and these Plessey electrolytics are almost certainly no good as well. So that'll be the first job. Well, I'll put some power on it, see what it does, but I'll almost certainly have to replace all these capacitors. So that's step 1 of this resurrection. Right, back with this radio. Please forgive the backlit video. I know it's suboptimal. So I've got it connected up to the bench power supply, 9 volts, and let's give it a switch on. Nothing at all. It's not drawing any current, obviously. Let's see. Probably a wire has fallen off. Nope, no wire has fallen off. No sound, no current. Oh! Duff switch. There was a crackle. And I happened to just be looking at the current meter, and the current went up to about 100 milliamps. Yes, this is one very, very sick radio. What does the wave change switch do? Nothing. Can we tune it? Well, the tuning dial moves fairly freely, but there's a bit of crackling, and it's drawing about 15 milliamps. Oh, it is actually working. There is some audio from it, but it's fading in and out. Yeah, one very sick radio. It needs some love. Let's see what we can do with it. This radio does seem to work, surprisingly. Took a while, it was a bit crunchy to start up, but I think I will replace all the capacitors. Well, I got the chassis out of the case, just held in with a couple of these screw standoffs, screw down on there through the chassis and the PCB. So we'll get the case out of the way. See, it's not too bad inside, just the outside is filthy. That will go for a clean, and then we have the chassis itself. So this is what needs working on. Step 1, evict a very dead snail. Yeah, there is no way that snail is coming back to life. So into the junk pot it goes. And let's take a look on the back. What do we have? Hard to see very much. Quite a dirty speaker. And we can just make out some of the PCB there. So this will all have to be removed and cleaned up. So when you know the secret to disassembling this, it's actually quite easy. These stick up pieces of metal, if the camera will focus, just feed through the PCB into some slots like here, and then they're just twisted, so there's absolutely no screws holding it together. It's just held together with bits of twisted metal. So the boards are out now. Got the RF stage and the audio stage. So I think it's just a case of go through and switch out capacitors. I think that'll be the first step, and see how we get on. The back of the board looks pretty good, quite a bit of flux residue, but not too bad in general. So we'll see how we get on with it. What's the RF stage like? Also pretty good. And spot one possible dodgy joint already here. That doesn't look overly well soldered. I'm sure I'll find a couple others as I go, but certainly not the worst looking board that's come across this bench recently. Right, back again. I've disconnected the speaker, which was connected up here to these two pads, and cleaned the cone off, evicted some more spiders or spider cocoons from around the speaker. It all looks pretty good. The chassis is in pretty good shape. Tiny amount of corrosion just here, which I'll polish off with a bit of Scotch-Brite. But apart from that, it's actually in pretty good condition, so I'll put that to one side for now. Nice logo, ELAC logo on the speaker. No idea of its impedance. So yeah, put that to one side. Got the RF stage, disconnected this from the audio stage as well, so I can work on them separately. So I'll come back to that one in a bit. And we'll make our first attempt at fixing the audio stage. So certainly that capacitor, the yellow one, will come out and be replaced. I'll switch this one out. I'll probably do some tests, see if they are any good, but I absolutely doubt it. It's easier to replace them. And the Hunt capacitor here, I'll probably also just replace, unless it tests good, but it's unlikely to. They're pretty notorious for failing, and we'll see how we get on. So just to look at the first of these capacitors removed. Plessey electrolytic 100 microfarad 6 volts DC working. Max temp 70C, made in England. Plastic's all very crunchy. I mean, this thing was made in 1961, so maybe the capacitors are a little bit older than that, depending on how many were in stock at the time. Let's give it a measure and see what it measures as. Well, mounted up in the trusty, and for trusty read cheap LC meter, let's see what it reads. Ah, it's supposed to be 100 microfarad, it's reading 163. ESR is 8.5 ohms. Not entirely terrible, but I'll replace it with a correct usable part. Let's just measure it again, as this meter sometimes gives different readings every time you press the button. No, about 165 microfarads. So I found a small stash of modern 100 microfarad 25 volt parts. I can't get to my main stash without causing an avalanche at the moment, so I've got exactly 3 of these. Let's see if they're any good. Yeah, near enough 100 microfarad, much lower ESR. Let's check each of them. Also looks pretty good. And see if I can get the third one without making everybody seasick in the video. Yep, also looks pretty good. So I'll switch out at least the 2 capacitors on the audio stage. So I've already taken one that was in parallel with this, and I'll replace this one, and then we can at least test it. So I also pulled out this Hunt capacitor, metallized, 0.5 microfarad, 150 something, serial number 150 volts. They're quite notorious for also failing, so let's measure it up in a tester. And we have quite a high ESR again, and 0.5 microfarad. It's a bit low, 3,000 odd nanofarads. So yeah, I'll replace that as well. Okay, back again. So I've replaced 2 capacitors on the back. This was the replacement for the Hunt capacitor, which should be 0.5 microfarad. I've got a 0.47 microfarad in there. This was the only one I could find that wasn't stupidly high voltage rated. And I've also replaced an electrolytic on the back. Can't find my axial lead parts, so I'm just having to put things where they fit. I also managed to fit this capacitor in. So that's as far as I really want to take the audio stage of this radio. So what I might do is go through and see what I can replace on the RF stage. So here we are on the RF board, and immediately you can see this Hunt capacitor is fractured. There's a crack in the case, so that will have to come out and be replaced immediately. There's also this other capacitor here, which has also got a nasty crack in the case. So that's at least 2 parts immediately need replacing. Other things I will replace, certainly these electrolytics will go. I'll probably just replace all of these capacitors. The fact I heard the radio actually working when I first powered it on, although it took a while, means the transistors are probably all still good. So I don't need to do any fiddling with those. The RF stage, apart from that, seems okay. So I'll just replace the parts and see if we can make it better. So something interesting immediately, I pulled out the first of the electrolytics that was here. It's an 8 microfarad part. When I put it on the tester, it's detected as a diode with some capacitance in series. So yeah, that's immediately a problem. It's been about 3 weeks since the last segment of the video. As I haven't actually put the video together yet at the time of recording this, I'm not quite sure what the last segment will have been. But I've been doing a bit of work on this. So I've now replaced all the electrolytic capacitors. So the ones that came off looked like this, and they were pretty much way out of spec or completely short circuit. So I've had to bodge this one in. It's a complete bodge, but it works. I had no axial lead electrolytics, so I can actually do a 1-for-1 replacement. And also this is a repair, not a restoration, so I wasn't trying to match component footprints exactly. I also took off a bunch of these Hunt capacitors, and they're all in the IF amplifier and filter stages, all around about 1/4 microfarad up to about 1 microfarad. But again, mostly out of spec, and some of them have cracked and just they're generally not in a good state. So they were between these resistors. So what I've done is replace them with some multi-layer ceramics, which just happen to fit the back, and then not shorting. They look like they're shorting here, but they're not. There's plenty of space. I also replaced one here. I'll put a circuit diagram in now to show which parts have been replaced. So that's the main RF stage. The other section of this radio was the audio amplifier. So once again, replaced electrolytics. And there was another big electrolytic here. There were actually 2 electrolytics in parallel here. So they have all been replaced. The big capacitor that was here has just been replaced by a little polyester film cap, which fits much nicer. There's plenty of space on the back. This is one of the electrolytics, and the other one's on this side of the board. I think they're just decoupling. They're not doing anything in particular, nothing too fancy. These parts are just the transistors. So this is 3 transistors on this part. The main output driver's there, and this is just a little pre-amp pre-driver. Again, not a vast amount on this board. Touched up a few other solder joints. Need to clean off some flux, but again, this is just a repair. Get it working. It'll go back in the case. No one will really see much of this. Talking of the case, I gave it a clean. It's looking a lot nicer than when it came out of the shed. The fiberglass is doing really well. The paper covering was what was a bit grubby, so that's come up pretty well. These are just the standoffs that hold the boards, and a couple of washers that just fell out. I did clean the front. I've repaired the crack in there with a dab of super glue on the back. The one thing that didn't survive the cleaning was the red coloration on the dial, which was there. It just got touched with water and it just washed away. There was absolutely no saving it, which is a shame. And I will just go back and probably touch up some of these issues where the paper covering has gone. But otherwise it's all seeming to do quite well. So probably the next video in this series, or next segment in this video, will be it put back together and working. Fingers crossed. We're again a few days on from the last segment. Time keeps passing. I actually forgot to video a couple of steps. So the radio is now reassembled. Take the back off. I did a bit of rewiring. Actually getting the radio back in the case wasn't the easiest step. It's a very tight fit. There's not much space up around by the antenna coil. And where the standoffs mount, there's a pin, and that gets stuck on the PCB. And all of this shielding material that the whole thing is attached to. But it's in there now, it works. New battery contacts, some rewiring up to the speaker, and internal connections between the PCBs have been remade. It looks like there's missing components. There's quite a bit of space here where there were those hunts and the Plessey electrolytics, and there's space up there for a large capacitor, but everything's been fitted on the back as it was just easier to do. So it's fully functional again, it works. But as this was just a repair, not a restoration, I haven't done anything to clean up the front, apart from give the radio a good wash, and I fixed the crack in the speaker screen. But it's a repair, not a restoration, so just getting it working was the aim. Still need to find a knob for the front. It's a recessed pin it has to connect to. None of the knobs I've got have a shaft which will mount onto that. But yeah, it's fully functional. The switches are a bit stiff, they rub on the case. It's still not sure the PCB is in there entirely correctly, but I may go back and just modify that. There's probably just a bit of tweaking needed, but that's as it stands at the moment. So I couldn't end the video without actually showing it working. So it's currently tuned to some unknown frequency, and there's a play going on. Tuning can be achieved with fingers at the moment, and medium wave, long wave switch also works, but long wave is not so good at the moment at this time. So I think I'll wrap up there. Slightly longer repair than I'd have liked, but was fairly in depth on a stage that was missed in the filming before this, was just going through and peaking up the IF stage, but it hadn't drifted too much. So that was a fun little repair which extended over far too many weeks.